All right, coming to you live from Brooklyn. You can hear all the honks and stuff, or you will in a second. So I've been to Israel so many times, it would be impossible to count at this point. But every time I think about it, my memory always starts at Ben Gurion Airport and then running to my Savta in Ramat Gan as a kid. And from there, going to the Makola, which is the market, getting altik, which is like ice pops and all the different treats, and putting it on her tab, which I didn't know was a tab. I thought that the owner just loved her as much as I did, and everything was like on the house. My family originally, or they came from Yemen, where my ancestors lived for 2,000 years. Over 100 years ago, my grandmother's side of the family decided to move to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and then to Israel in 1933. Let me know if you can't hear me or something, because I don't know, sometimes there's issues with the mic. So once I graduated high school, I'm reading from, this is story time, basically I do every week, and this is Light of the Infinite, Emanations of Illumination. So we're on the chapter for this week's Torah portion, Kitavo, and it's called First Fruit. So once I graduated high school, I went to yeshiva in Israel for a year in Bayit Vagan, a nice neighborhood in Jerusalem. Every memory I have of Israel feels like a dream. There's just something surreal, spectacular, ineffable about the land. After that year immersed in ancient Jewish texts, I went to University of Maryland for a couple of years and felt drawn to go back to Jerusalem to study more. So I went back to yeshiva, this time right outside of the Old City. Walking into the Old City on Friday night, you'd feel Shabbat like you never had before, realizing you're walking through history, through what's left of the two Batei HaMikdash, the two holy temples, seeing the stones that surround the promised land of an eternal people. Some Shabbatot, I would take my friends from yeshiva to my Savtas in Ramat Gan. They all called her Jima. I remember her waking up at 5 a.m. every day, covering her head and saying the morning tefillot. She would cook Yemenite food, Moroccan salads, and my friends and I would sing Shabbat songs in Hebrew. Let me just see what's up with this mic. Hold on. So we'd sing these Shabbat songs as she sat on the couch crying from happiness. It's incredible to realize all the time that she and her family were exiled in Yemen and Ethiopia, and that they were able to come back to Israel, and that she could see her grandson living in Jerusalem, singing the songs that have been sung throughout history, every Shabbat since Jews left Egypt and entered Israel. She had made it. We had made it. The yearning for home and the unification of the people with its ancestral homeland had been realized in her lifetime. Parashat Kitavo, when you come, mentions our receiving the land of Israel several times, tying the land to our keeping of the mitzvot, of the commandments. In a time when monotheism and morality were revelations, Jews revealed truth in a world where it was hidden. In Kitisa, we touched on Mark Twain's observation of Jews as the eternal people and his question of what makes them so. He wrote, if the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 0.25% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine are all very out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages, and has done it with hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to the dream stuff and passed away. The Greeks and Romans followed and made a vast noise, and they were gone. Other people have sprung up, held their torch high for a time, but it burnt out. They sit in twilight now and have vanished. The Jew saw them all, survived them all, and is now what he has always been, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakness of his part, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert but aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jews. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? So this is a quote from Mark Twain. This parasha, this Torah portion, answers the question of the immortality of the people of Israel with the answer, morality and the culture of ethics that the mitzvot establish. The beginning and ending of this Torah portion teach the ritual of bringing the bikurim, the first fruits, and the Beit HaMikdash, which is the holy temple, as a thanksgiving to Hashem, to God, which we will dive deep into via Sichot, talks of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And I'm going to be in Crown Heights for Shabbat, so I'm super excited. So the parasha, the Torah portion, concludes with a detailed description of blessings that follow one's keeping of the mitzvot, of the commandments, how we could attain our promised land and be the eternal people, while at the same time outlining the curses that come with their desecration, exile, and destruction. The Torah portion opens as such. You shall speak and say before Hashem your God, an Aramite destroyed my father and went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number. And Hashem brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and he brought us into this place and has given us the land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought the first fruit of the land, which you, O Hashem, have given me. So Lubavitcher Rebbe points out that the Aramite refers to Lavan and his intention to destroy Jacob and the entire Jewish nation. Bringing the first fruits with this acknowledgement is a thank you to Hashem for saving the nation from destruction by Lavan and later at the hands of the Egyptians, and instead bringing us to the promised land flowing with milk and honey. We saw this earlier as well when Hashem spoke to Moses at the burning bush, informing him that he would redeem the Israelites and bring them to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The Rebbe asks why we are commanded to mention that these instances, Lavan and Egypt, and not mention so many other miracles. He explains that these two might have been singled out since they threaten a total extermination of the nation and not just threats to an element or faction. But if that were the case, then we would have to mention Esav, since he had acted on what Yaakov feared, lest he come and smite me, the mother with the children. There would be no Jewish people either. So it's kind of a question, but also a statement. So the Rebbe offers an incredible insight into human nature and the power of the mind to create seeming realities. So the Rebbe argues that perhaps Esav, Yaakov, Jacob's brother, didn't constitute a real danger, since when they did meet after all those years, Jacob was unharmed. The threat then was sown in Yaakov's mind, in his anxiety and apprehension. The difference with Lavan, who also did not harm Yaakov, was that with Lavan, his intention to do so was accounted by Hashem as if he had done what he intended. And Rashi explains why the verse reads, an Aramite destroyed my father, rather than an Aramite sought to destroy, because Hashem reckons intention as deed. Yaakov's danger at the hands of Lavan was something that was intended, whereas with Esav, the danger was simply a possibility, but not something that would require a miracle to circumvent. Thus, it didn't merit mentioning in the Thanksgiving ritual. The first fruits only became required once we entered, conquered, and allocated and settled the land, the promised land. The mitzvah, the commandment, was not a thanksgiving of the gift of the land by Hashem, but it's contingent on our settling the land as a permanent home. Only then can we rejoice with peace of mind, and when we are at peace, blessings reveal themselves. The same way we need to conquer and settle the physical promised land, we need to do that in our own struggle with our spiritual selves, making sure that we don't doubt ourselves to the point of blocking our own blessings. So there's this lyric that stuck out from Welcome to the Jungle, this Jay-Z song. Where did I go? I'm losing myself. I'm stuck in the moment. I look in the mirror, my only opponent. So our own promised lands are in our control. Sometimes it feels like it takes a miracle before we would see it or feel it at ease and unified to the point that it would manifest as a feeling of peace, enlightenment. But we have to enter into the process within ourselves, conquer our own doubts and parts of us that act as enemies toward our own selves, these enslavements. When we can settle ourselves to a space of peace, then we can reach a feeling of our own promised land. As we have seen in history, Israel could lay barren, as it has times since our exile after the destruction of the two holy temples, or it could be a land flowing with milk and honey, as it has been anytime the Jews were its inhabitants. Two examples of Lavan in Egypt are the two instances in which Yaakov and the ancestors settled somewhere. Yaakov stayed in Syria for 20 years, and the Israelites lived in Egypt for 210 years. It's when we felt settled somewhere that was not ours, or ours, and felt a seeming security in the space that enemies arose to destroy us, only to be defeated by Hashem. The Hasidic view of the first fruits, as explained in Or HaTorah, is as follows. The fruit of a tree is like the soul as it is enclosed by the body. And so the significance of offering the first fruits is the binding of the incarnate soul with its source, the creator of illumination. So just let me know if you could hear sound. We're going to jump back in. So this is done in two ways. The earthbound, which is the offering of the first fruit itself, which is done on Shavuot, the 50th day from the start of the counting of the Omer, and the spiritual drawing down heavenly via the accompanying prayer. Yaakov, Jacob's journey to Lavan, was a descent from the spiritual south of Beersheba to the corruption of Haran. And so was the Israelite journey to Egypt. From within these two descents, Hashem performed miracles to save us from the destruction and brought us to our promised land. And so these become the focus of our thanksgiving, prayer, and ritual, the redemption and unification that we need to constantly strive toward through action and prayer, never, God forbid, being stuck or feeling settled in exile and detachment from the place we are actually meant to be. So we can never rest and feel content with our own spiritual ascent, and must know that there is always more work to be done, more conquering of our inner struggle to work on, more reality to spiritualize for oneself and those around us. As the Rebbe teaches, the first fruits are meant to be dedicated to sanctity, and by doing so, we are fulfilling the purpose for which the world was created, to be made by human beings into a dwelling for Hashem, the Shachanti B'tocham, this sacred sanctuary. Israel is referred to as Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, because the word Eretz, land, comes from the same root as Ratzon, desire or will. Moving to Israel is called making Aliyah, which means going up. Israel, as it's a higher altitude than its surrounding countries, but we call it going up because the pilgrimage to Israel, one we are commanded to do for the Shalosh Regalim, the three high holiday festivals, is a spiritual ascent. Eretz Yisrael is a source for accessing the spiritual journey and personal growth. The sweetness of the fruit of the land that we read about in the parasha represents the spiritual love and desire that can be absorbed in the land. But before we can access them, we face obstacles, which force us to earn it while realizing how essential this end goal is. All of this requires emunah, faith, and bitachon, trust, to draw holiness down from above, to spiritualize reality. We first have to create a vessel for it, and that's done by creating space that manifested from true emunah and bitachon, from this faith and trust. And this actually, I was just talking about because I just did this show last night, this comedy show, Laugh Through the Heartbreak, and we sold it out, thank God, in New York at Rodney's, at the famous Rodney's Club in the Upper East Side. And my partner, he was too busy and he didn't think it was going to happen, so he kind of like backed out. But he had other obligations, whatever. And it got to the point where I was like, there's not that many tickets selling. It's a huge venue. Should I cancel? And I just decided, no, I'm going to shift to the positive. I'm going to be full faith, like Hashem could do anything, and just trust that everything's going to work out. And it ended up selling out, and it was crazy. And the only reason that last night even happened and that everybody had like the most incredible time, and like we got to have this happen in New York and this 5th sold out show is because I was just I just pushed through positivity and faith to sort of put full trust in Hashem, the universe, that everything was going to work out, and it sold out, and it was crazy. But it's this creating this vessel and tapping into this faith, emunah, and this trust, the bitachon, and that creates the vessel for bringing this blessing in. The only place in the world we are commanded to keep Shemitah, the year of release, and Yovel, the Jubilee year, is in Israel. This is an act that personifies full faith. More than releasing control of working the fields for an entire year every 6 years, and again to a greater extent every 49 years, as it's written, my blessings for you in the 6th year will yield a crop sufficient for a 3-year period. So we're actually seeing it play out. In this pasuk, this verse, Hashem addresses the worry people might have that they won't have sufficient provisions for the year of Shemitah and the year after it, or the years after it. Hashem says that he will bless the land, and that miraculously there will be 3 years worth of provisions to reap in the 6th year. Just before the Shemitah year, just as there was a double portion of manna on Erev Shabbat, when the Jews were in the desert, this manna that came from the sky. So too, there will be extra produce before the Shemitah in the Promised Land, so the people can fully celebrate this moment of holy rest. The most beautiful part of Shemitah is that every 7 years, we are commanded to forgive all debts, to not work the land of Israel by planting or harvesting, and to let all the produce that grows become hefker, ownerless, so that anyone can take and eat from it. Taking this a step further, with Yovel, the Jubilee year, in the 50th year, the land of Israel again must lie fallow. It may not be worked, and all land in Israel that was purchased in those 50 years are returned to its original owner, in addition to the cancellation of all debts and freeing of all slaves. These laws pertain only to the land of Israel, as it says, take off your shoes from your feet. Sorry, we're in Brooklyn, so the noises are crazy over here. Take off your shoes from your feet, for the place upon which you are standing is holy ground. And the Arizal explains that true freedom is the release of consciousness from its constricted state, the ability to approach divine understanding of the world. This is done by each of us in Israel as it's done on the very land we stand on. This is all a hint toward a time when we won't be constricted or held down by this world and its toil. Instead, we'll be completely unified in purpose and spirituality. This is referred to the days of Kulo Shabbat, an entirety of Shabbat. Chazal, our sages, refer to it as the Messianic era, the times of Mashiach, when darkness will be fully transformed to light, and we won't have to toil for our food. As King David sings, let there be an abundance of grain on the earth. Chazal, our sages, teach that Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, was only destroyed when there were no longer people of faith. And the Midrash says, in the merit of their faith, the Jews will be redeemed from exile. When the Jews returned from their exile, they will realize it was only the power of faith which brought about the redemption. The very faith we carried since we left Egypt and became a nation is the very faith that we are reminded to continue to carry today. The Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, taught that even though the Exodus happened once, yesterday's Exodus is today's limitation from which we must free ourselves. The Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, and is etymologically related to the word Metzar, which is this limitation, this constriction. Jewish mystical thought explains that just as we recall the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the historical exodus from Egypt, we have to continuously leave our own proverbial Egypts, as it's written, like the days you left Egypt. This world is a place of finitude. Our bodies and natural animalistic tendencies tie down our souls. But at the same time, our emunah, our faith, our souls can tap into the light of the infinite, the divine source, through tefillah, prayer, mitzvot, commandments, and learning Torah. In this way, we overcome our natural negative inclinations and liberate ourselves from the finite shackles. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov teaches that the essence of emunah, faith, corresponds to tefillah, prayer. And miracles in the land of Israel, while the antithesis of emunah, of faith, is Egypt and exile and the absence of miracles. Redemption, the coming of the Mashiach, is dependent on an abundance of faith, emunah. The Zohar explains that tzedek, justice, and emunah are both forms of judgment. Kabbalistically, they both relate to the feminine principle of malchut. The difference is that tzedek, righteousness, refers to a harsh decree when punishment is issued with severity. But when emet, when truth, the masculine principle of tiferet, is coupled with tzedek, it becomes emunah. Jumping back to the verses about the land flowing with milk and honey, Ramban, Nachmanides, teaches that the key in the verse is the word flowing, because fruit trees grow in many different terrains, but their produce overflows with nectars only when the land is especially fertile, and when the trees are particularly well nourished. Just as with livestock, they survive in many habitats, but only overflow with milk when they are in particularly fertile pastures. So we see a land flowing with milk and honey is the manifestation of a blessing, the fertility of the promised land. On Shabbat, we reap what we have sowed throughout the week. We meditate on the space of being and having been created, instead of being stuck in a circle of endless creation and trying to meld creation into our own benefits. With Shemitah and Yovel in Eretz Yisrael and in Israel, we experience this to a much greater extent. We could abstain from working and toiling for our food and clearly see the hand of our Creator and Provider as He provides bounty in a time when normally the seeds of doubt would be sowed. This is why the first fruits are offered as a thanksgiving, because they represent the continuous fruit and charity we receive from Hashem. So Shabbat Shalom. This is story time for First Fruit from my 5th book, Emanations of Illumination, from the Light of the Infinite series. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Target if you want to order it from there, or you can get it from me. DM me any questions. Love you guys so much. Shabbat Shalom. See you next time.